Anyway, delighted you are here, delighted you have chosen to come and to join with us on what is a rather wet and gray Sunday. But let me simply say today that our text for today again shows that even while Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, he himself took the time to go to church. In fact, he did more than just go to church. He did a little guest preaching along the way. Luke tells us that he was teaching in one of the synagogues when something unbelievable happened. And so if you have your Bibles or your New Testaments, I invite you to turn to Luke chapter 13 as we read verses 10 through 17. Luke 13, verses 10 through 17. Because what Luke records for us in those few verses is this incredible occurrence in worship that Sunday morning or that Sabbath day. Beginning in verse 10, Luke says that on the Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." Then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue leader said to the people, "There are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath." And the Lord answered him, "You hypocrites! Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" When he said this, all his opponents were humiliated. But the people, they were delighted with all the wonderful things that he was doing. Initially, when we read this story, on the surface at least, it sounds like other typical healing stories from the Gospels. Jesus is in a public place on the Sabbath day. Someone comes to him with a need. Jesus sees the need. He feels their pain. He heals the person. And what happens? The religious authorities lose their cool. For example, in the 3rd chapter of Mark, Jesus is in the synagogue on a Sabbath day, and a man with a withered hand comes to him, and he sees the man, has compassion on him, heals him, and immediately Mark tells us, then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Again, in the 5th chapter of John, Jesus encounters a man who's been ill for 38 years. Jesus asks him if he wants to be made well, and then, without really even waiting for an answer from the gentleman, Jesus simply tells him to take up his bed and walk. In that moment, the man's healed. And in the next moment, the Jewish religious authorities begin persecuting Jesus. Just a few chapters later, he deals with a man born blind in John chapter 9. And the religious leaders object. They say this man couldn't possibly be from God. This man being Jesus. And you may ask yourself, well, why not? I want you to listen carefully to why they didn't believe Jesus could be from God. And the reason I want you to listen carefully is because in a few moments there's going to be a test. Okay? So you get the knowledge early. said he could not possibly be from God. Why? Because Jesus healed this man on the Sabbath, the Jewish holy day, the day in which their law said no work was to be done, including, they believed, the work of healing. So when Jesus restores withered hands or useless legs or sightless eyes, He typically breaks the law, and the religious authorities are typically upset. Now, on the surface, at least, the story in today's gospel reading from Luke sounds just like those other stories. I mean, after all, Jesus is in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. He sees this woman there, the one whose back was bent over, the woman who was unable to straighten up. He feels compassion for her. He heals her, and the leader of the synagogue loses it. It's a story that falls into the same pattern as all of those other healing stories, except what makes this healing story so different is the nature of the woman's problem. Look at the text again. Luke says that she came into the synagogue with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. Now, some versions translate that as a spirit of infirmity. Not an infirmity, mind you, but a spirit of infirmity. Let's remember who Luke is. Luke is a physician. He's a doctor. And he seems to be trying to tell his readers and us that the problem this woman was facing was not so much physical as it was psychological or spiritual. I mean, could it possibly be that a burdened mind and or a burdened spirit, could it be possible that that's the reason that it has resulted in a stooped over back? According to medical books, it's called conversion reaction. And there is a long list of physical symptoms that can be caused by extreme mental and or spiritual stress. Things such as fainting, seizures, paralysis, blindness, hearing loss, loss of speech, muscle weakness, difficulty swallowing, and the list goes on and on and on. According to the medical community, all of those symptoms can occur without any real physical problem. For example, a person becomes so fearful of what could happen if they leave home that they won't ever get out. They never even get out of bed. And as a result, they become an invalid. Why? Not because of sickness, but because of fear. We hear that kind of language sometimes, don't we? So-and-so was paralyzed by fear. So-and-so died of a broken heart. You know, so-and-so's just worrying themselves sick. Bill Moyers once said that our language is evidence of our innate understanding that the mind and the body are bound together. Or as someone once said, the physical and the psychological are intertwined. So where in the other places, Luke's gospel, where he says that someone had leprosy or had dropsy or had an infirmity. In today's text, he simply says that the woman who came to Jesus had a spirit of infirmity. In other words, a spiritual problem that had made her sick. Which leads me to find that I can't help but wonder if this woman in Luke 13 is possibly suffering from a so-called conversion reaction. And while there is no way to truly know, let's just suppose that 18 years before she encountered Jesus, she had done something that within her caused her such terrible guilt that she could no longer look anybody in the eye. Or perhaps even more likely, suppose that 18 years earlier, someone had done something to her that caused her so much shame that she could no longer look anyone in the eye. I don't think it's really that hard to imagine. I don't think it's that hard to imagine in her time. I don't think it's that hard to imagine in our time. Because you see, at first it would simply have been a matter of lowering her gaze to avoid eye contact with people. But eventually she might have begun to lower her head, and then her shoulders, and then her back, until 18 years later, you would simply see her hobbling around town using a short, sturdy walking stick in order that she might support her bent-over body. And all that time, she would have been looking people straight in the eye. Well, she'd been looking at them straight in the knees, I suppose, which was probably better for her than looking them in the eye. I mean, after all, knees do not look back. Knees don't look at you mockingly or accusingly. And we can't even be sure why she went to the synagogue that particular day. I mean, she may have gone because she heard there was a man there that could heal her. But truthfully, we really don't know. Luke doesn't tell us. He simply says that she appeared, crippled as she was, and that when she did, Jesus took notice of her and responded to her need. Which intrigues me. Because you see, what I want to know is what exactly, or how exactly, did Jesus deal with this woman's problem? I'm going to suggest 4 things to you. First of all, He sees that woman. He sees her. A woman who, because of her condition, must have been easy for others to simply overlook, or perhaps worse yet, ignore. Because Jesus sees her, and He sees not only the bent over condition of her body, but He sees the bent over condition of her spirit. Jesus seems to have that ability, folks. I mean, if Jesus were to be speaking at Linden on this particular Lord's Day, He would be sitting where I'm sitting, or be standing where I normally would stand, looking out at this congregation. And if He's doing that, don't you think He could recognize those of us whose minds, hearts, and spirits have been crippled by the things we've done or the things we've had done to us. I mean, if Jesus were here looking out over this congregation, don't you think it would be possible for Him to immediately see what so many of us are perhaps trying to hide from everyone else? First of all, He sees the woman. Jesus' next step is to call the woman to Him, and to her credit, she comes to Him. Jesus, as He always does, takes the initiative. But the woman responds to His initiative. That is, she does her part in the process of healing. And if any of us who are in similar circumstances are going to be helped, we're going to need to do the same. When Jesus says to you and I, come and be forgiven, be healed, be saved. Folks, we're going to need to get up on our feet and come to Jesus. He sees the woman. He calls the woman to Himself. And third, when Jesus speaks to her, He says, woman, you're set free from your infirmity. Do you notice the order? Before ever laying a hand on her, He assures her of her freedom. Woman, whatever shame or guilt has kept you roped down and doubled over, has left you now. It's been cut loose. And so have you. And finally, only then does Jesus lay His hands on her. And when He does, it's as if the words He has just spoken come true. Let's picture it this way. Let's imagine that there is an actual rope tied like a noose around this woman's neck. And it's looped down and tied around her knees, keeping her doubled over. You can imagine that happening. And then imagine that Jesus puts one hand on her back and He reaches down with the other hand and retrieves a sharp knife, and He simply cuts through the rope in one clean slice. And in that moment, the woman is once again able to stand up straight. She gasped for breath. Almost falls over backwards. But Jesus catches her. He catches her by the shoulders, and when she looks into His eyes, the first pair of eyes that she's looked into in 18 years, what does she see? Not accusation, but acceptance. And she begins to do what? She begins to praise God. And the leader of the synagogue absolutely loses it. And you know why he loses it, don't you? Because Jesus was healing on the what? The what? Sabbath. And healing was considered a kind of what? Work. And working on the Sabbath was against what? The law. Listen, the ruler of the synagogue says to the crowd, there are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days to be cured, and not on the Sabbath. And my guess is there were no doubt a crowd in the synagogue that day. Perhaps an overwhelming majority who would have been nodding in agreement with the leader of the synagogue, because after all, worship was to be done in a decent and orderly manner. And no doubt there was Jesus, knowing their thoughts, who responded by simply saying to the crowd who was there, "You hypocrites! Don't each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water? Should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, who Satan has kept bound for 18 years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" You see, Jesus understands. Jesus understands that setting people free is the work of God. And that there is no day more appropriate for that than the Lord's Day. Do you happen to remember what Jesus said on another Sabbath in the synagogue when he found himself preaching in his hometown? It's found in Luke chapter 4. It's his inaugural sermon. Jesus said in the synagogue on that Sabbath, quote, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for He has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." There was his mission statement. There is exactly what his life was going to be about. And because of that, let me simply say to you on this day, if you find yourself having been bound by some spirit of infirmity, that is, if you're here this morning or within the sound of my voice and you find that your life is being bound by guilt, by shame, if your life is being bound by fear or despair, if your life's being bound by self-loathing or by defeat, whatever it might be that has somehow roped your mind and your heart and your spirit, I want you to hear this. On this day and in this place, Jesus seeks to slice through that rope and release you. Because it is His nature, it is His pleasure, it is the work to which He was called, and the purpose for which He came, to set captives free. How many of you are familiar with a book entitled Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan? I see a lot of you are. In addition to the book that you are probably most familiar with, there's an illustrated edition for children. And in the early pages of the illustrated book for children, a man named Christian starts off from his city in ragged clothes with this huge burden on his back. A burden that is meant to represent his sin. And it weighs him down. It bends him over. And for the first several pages, he staggers along under the weight of that enormous load that he's carrying. But at last he reaches a place where a cross has been erected. And one of the most great pictures in that book is the picture of Christian standing at the foot of that cross. As that heavy load that he's been carrying falls from his back and vanishes into a bottomless pit behind him. The straps that were holding it onto his shoulders have been cut through cleanly. And for the very first time in the book, he's able to stand up straight. And even if you couldn't read the words as a child, you get the picture. And that picture is Christian was set free at the foot of the cross. Listen. It may very well be that you've been burdened far too long. You mask it well. Perhaps others are totally unaware. But you're battling too long. You've been burdened. You're carrying the weight of life around. Perhaps it's your guilt. Perhaps it's your shame. Perhaps it's your fear. Regardless of what it might be, what Jesus would say to you this morning is this: come to the foot of the cross. Come to Him for the spiritual healing you need. Come to Him for the forgiveness that you seek. And feel that load slip from your shoulders as you accept the gift of God's grace and your own deliverance. Just a moment, we're going to stand. And we're going to sing a song of response. And all I can say to you is this: if that's what you're wanting done this morning, you simply have to pray just a very simple prayer. Jesus, do exactly for me what needs to be done.